All right, welcome to this episode of Photo Theology. I'm your host, Doug, and today we have another exciting episode of Photo Theology. So, what we're going to be talking about today is the Pentax K-1, not to be confused with the Pentax K01, okay, because they're two different cameras altogether. Sorry about that. And we're going to be talking about today on a couple fronts of it, but mainly what we're going to be going after are the missed opportunities of this camera. So the reason why I'm, out of all the cameras in the world, talking about the Pentax full frame camera is because I believe that this is the most impactful camera that is going to be made this year, and may even be the most impactful camera going into the next 2 to 3 years. And what I mean by that is every other camera brand has essentially consolidated their base. Just about every single camera brand has. They've consolidated their base in the sense of what their essential, we'll say, mission statement is through their lineup, and then having a fellowship. Now, certain brands are constantly evolving. Like, for example, Fuji. Fuji's X Pro series lineup, or X Trans lineup, I should say. It's not an X Pro lineup because that's an actual camera, but X Trans lineup with the newest edition, the X Pro 2, is changing the game for Fuji. It's changing the game, but when we talk about changing the game in their way, it's more of a transitional thing in the sense of, hey, I've been shooting with a full frame camera, and now I want to have a lighter body. I'm going to keep my full frame gear, but I'm just for everyday use or casual use, or for jobs that I don't think are that demanding, I'm going to go in there and use this X Pro 2 or this XT1 or whatever the case may be. Now, for Fuji, in all fairness, there is a transitioning going on of replacement as well. So you have a lot of people who shoot traditional DSLR. It's kind of funny we say traditional DSLR because you're still talking about a digital camera, which is technically not traditional in the age, in terms of age of film cameras. But regardless, you get my point. The traditional mirrored DSLRs, Fuji is, of course, flipping customers with their X-Trans system, and that they are, and I wouldn't deny that, for the world. So you have a great amount of success there. Also with Panasonic / Olympus Micro Four Thirds, in the ability to shoot, relatively reasonable looking ultra high definition video in the form of a 4K. And when you talk about lens assortment and you talk about speed and performance and whatnot, they've been able to carve out, their niche as well. And then of course you have Sony, which, Sony is just, they're just Sony. You're talking more of a transition with them in the sense of sensor technology, the fact that they have their hand in just about every single camera that is built now, or at least it seems like that. Seems like it. Although realistically they don't. They own, I believe, around probably about 60% of the market now. It's over 50. Taking Toshiba, it's definitely over 50. But to that point of having those manufacturers that have relative changed the market from their aspect, no one's going to be as impactful as Pentax in their full frame system. And here's the reason why. Okay, here's the reason why. The first thing is this: brand new revenues. Other brands, of course, they sell product, they're going to gain brand new revenues. That's just, business 101. That's totally understandable. But Pentax is different in the sense that they're not changing over, or they're not selling just a brand new camera, but they're selling a brand new system. That's what they're doing. They're selling a brand new system in a sense where, for people who may have been traditionally Canon or Nikon, and like, let's say they had a Rebel, or let's say they had a D1000 series camera, and they're looking to make that plunge. Well, Pentax is going to provide something for them. For people who are Pentaxian users, even myself with my K20D, or my K01, or, using the K52 or the, K52S, again, there's that reason for change. The change, though, is not an insignificant change, but it's a dramatic change. In fact, it can be, depending on how you look at it, a dynamic change. A dynamic change in terms of the revenues you're going to be spending, and also, more importantly even than that, the kind of system that you're going to be using. So Pentax has done something that is very, very different from other manufacturers in that sense. Because you are talking about, in most cases, even a different format of camera. And by format, I'm not talking mirrored or mirrorless. I'm talking, going from a crop sensor to a full frame sensor. I'm talking about going from what was probably 14 to 16 megapixels, or maybe 18 megapixels, or even a 24 megapixel, regardless, to a 36 megapixel. And depending on the type of user that, the background that they come from, you even have changes that will be relevant in the sense of how they're actually able to shoot with a camera, versus what they were doing before. So there's a lot of things that are going on with pentax that make them a really great, attractive, system to look at this point in time with the K-1 or the K1. We'll just call it the K1 because I think that sounds more natural than dash. No one usually talks about a dash or hyphen or anything in the name of something. So we'll just call it the K1. And again, not to be confused with the K01. But the point of what I'm going after here and what I'm talking about in terms of its relevance is you're actually changing, format, style, lens selection. You're changing the whole thing up, and again, not in the way that you would with a mirrored system. This is not a, hey, I've been shooting with a Nikon, D800 and now I'm picking up a Fuji, X-Trans, or sorry, not X, well, yeah, an X-Trans camera as my main camera for shooting or as a replacement. It's not one of those. Most people that are professionals, most professional photographers who are picking up an X-Trans system, they're trying to degress in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's size that they're wanting to digress on. Maybe it is price that they're wanting to digress on. Maybe it is just trying to get back to a sense of a connection with their camera, and they're willing to digress their entire previous system in terms of how they built it up to, get to something or get back to something that they enjoy. But I wouldn't necessarily say it's a progression when you talk about mirrored cameras and transition to mirrorless cameras. I wouldn't always say that. And I want to make that clear, because although I do personally believe that an X-Trans and a Fuji X-Trans system easily kicks the crap out of a Nikon or Canon, full frame or crop system. The fact is in many ways, you are not talking about a progression. You're talking a degression. In other words, you're scaling back on something. Now that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but let's face it. A lot of good photographers who have been shooting years with Nikon and Canon, what's happened? What happens to them? They get older, and as you get older, what happens? You're just less in shape. It's the truth. You're less in shape. You're not shooting the way you used to. You're just not feeling that vibe, and you want to get back to some more simplicity, although still maintaining, what you believe the process of integrity and having gear of integrity. It's the truth. It's the truth. This is why, you have people basically going in the way of an X-Trans system versus trying to pick up a Leica or even, dare I say, a Sony mirrorless system. Why? Because those systems are bigger, they're heavier, and they, quite frankly, don't necessarily, well, not the Leica, I don't want to say it about the Leica, but the Sony in this case, they don't necessarily give the output for what you spend. The Leica does. The Sony, I'd say the jury's still out on that one. And we'll have a different conversation for a different day with that. But no, Sony's not beating Fuji's X-Trans system, if you're wondering. But where pentax comes into play is they're the exact opposite. You're not degressing, you're progressing. You're getting a bigger camera. You're getting, you're increasing in size. You're increasing in megapixels. You're increasing in format. You're basically increasing in whatever you're increasing in, but the fact is you're increasing. That's basically where this camera is positioned. Now look, there are people who will probably own a Nikon D810 and they'll hop over to a pentax, and they may feel that based on what I'm saying here, you know what, wouldn't you technically be degressing with a pentax? And I would say technically, yeah, we could probably say that. But obviously you're going over to pentax either because of its, control system or because of its price or whatever it is. But pentax is still offering something even for you, meaning that Nikon D800 slash 810 customer. So, and that's excluding lenses. So, why is this important? Like, why is it important to the camera market? Why even have this conversation? Well, the reason why this conversation is important is for you guys to understand that pentax is probably going to be the last manufacturer that is going to go full frame in the next number of years that is going to build a full frame camera of relevance. That's why. They are the last of the last. Panasonic's not coming out with a full frame camera anytime soon. All right? It'd probably be another 20 years before they'd even think about it. And, to my point here, Olympus would be the same thing. It'd probably be another 20 years before these guys would even realistically consider it. Canon and Nikon already established. And Sony, they've had full frame. So they really don't matter. But pentax is basically the last of the last of manufacturers that will really hit the full frame market hard anytime soon in the foreseeable future. And what I mean by that is I'm not talking about, hey, we've made full frame cameras before, and now what we're doing is coming out with a sports full frame camera, something like that. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is something that is groundbreaking. What I'm talking about is something that is not a follow-up to anything. And what I'm talking about is something that actually has the potential to actually shift the dynamics of market share within the market. That's what I'm talking about there. So this is where pentax actually stands. And this is what makes pentax so insanely unique compared to some of the others out there that we could talk about. I mean, I think it's no great mystery. Sony, with their full frame system on their email, has not gotten the traction that they've been hoping for. They haven't. It's kind of funny. You got all these people shooting these YouTube videos talking about Sony this and Sony that, and they're trying to preach the Sony brand. They're trying. Sony's still not going anywhere. People aren't buying into it. And part of it comes down to, if you sit down and actually ever get a chance to examine a Sony full frame camera, you'll quickly figure out why it's not that impressive. You're like, is this a point and shoot? Or is this actually a full frame camera? And unfortunately for Sony, their cameras come off more as point and shoots than they do a full frame. The reason for it is its production. It's the production value. It's very low in quality. In fact, you put that thing up against a Sony a6000 or a Sony Nex camera and you go, there's not really that much of a difference going on here in these bodies. And the answer is yes. Transitionally, there actually is not much of a difference if you're looking at menu system and stuff like that. And these are the kind of things that hurt Sony as a brand. Well, with pentax, it's different. With pentax, the manufacturer, Ricoh, really thought it through. And they came out with, a very industrialized body, weather sealed. I mean, shoot, you can dump a bucket of water on the thing. I mean, their stuff's pretty impressive. The other thing is you talk about focusing system, the focusing system type. Their SOFOX, whatever number it is up at, right now, it's like 13, 14 to the 5th power, whatever. The numbers just get outrageous with them with their autofocusing systems. That's why I'm not actually being serious about the number of it that they're at. But basically the way it works with the SOFOX system is that, it hits a solid -3 exposure. I mean, in other words, the pentax can shoot almost anything and everything, which they do have an incredible, reliable focusing system. This is one of the things I've always found interesting in the past when talking to people who deal with Nikon and pentax, you know, focusing system wise, if you shot with a pentax, you know a Nikon and Canon are nothing like a pentax. Now, people on YouTube, okay, the reviewers would have you sit up here and believe, they would have you believe that the Nikon / Canon, they have some great autofocusing system that, you know, just bass in utter superiority to pentax. And in reality, it's not even close. It's not even close. I have done shots where I've tested side by side a pentax and a Nikon system. And the Nikon system just, it can't hang in there with the pentax. Like, for example, let's say that I have a row of black items in and we'll even say -1 exposure area. Okay. And I've got to go through some shadowing also within this lit scenario. And I want to focus on one of the bags. Nikon camera, not doing it. You can spend all day there trying to get it to do it. It's still not going to do it. Doesn't make a difference what lens you put on there. Still not doing it. Okay. Take the pentax, autofocuses, boom, it's done, it's over, the shot's taken. Okay. It's simple things like that, you know, black on black, so on and so forth, or an extremely dark graphite on black, those kind of things. Yeah, shallow contrast, not its strong point when it comes to a Nikon. A pentax can definitely deal with those kind of things. You know, yet again, reviewers tend to forget these kind of things. The reason for it is that they decide, here, let me run out, you know, outside and just take some random shots of some trees or whatever with some shitty ass lens on a pentaxian camera, and then let me sit up here and make the call. Versus going out there with a camera from Nikon or Canon, which is, you know, traditionally been 2 to 3 times the price, and then I'm using some high grade lens, which costs more than the damn camera does, and then let's see what happens there. Yeah, that's usually how it goes. So pentax normally doesn't get a fair shake by camera reviewers, no matter who they are. It normally doesn't happen. But I'm pretty gracious with them. And it's only based on the fact that when you start comparing gear to gear, you see how pentax does come ahead. And that's why they're still in business. You would think with the poor marketing they have, you know, that they'd be stomped out of existence now. But the reason why they're still in business is because of their potential. It is because of their following. And it's just based on the fact that their stuff really does work. You know, it does. You don't question, can it focus it? It will focus it. Now, there's always exceptions to the rule. But for the sake of what we're saying here, you do have that. And of course, the K1 actually delivers on this. The other thing that you want to keep in mind about, pentax and their K1, aside from the bigger format, and aside from the reliable focus that you're going to have here, is that pentax is changing the game on how they introduce this thing. So, I had told you that for me, what I liked about this camera in the last episode when we talked about the K01 was, the lens selection. The fact that they had a 150 to 450 millimeter lens. The fact that they had a, 70 to 200 millimeter lens, f2.8, and they had a 24 to, 75, or I'm sorry, 70. Anyways, f2.8. They had these lenses because I told you if you're going to be serious about photography and having a bigger system like this, you need to have that range of lenses. Now, some people would want to talk about a wide angle because they believe that is as it's been dubbed, the holy trinity of lenses, that you got to have a wide, you got to have a short zoom, and then a long zoom, f2.8 among them the whole way through as the aperture goes. I myself can live without the wide for a moment. You can always figure out a wide. All right, usually wide angle lenses are pretty expensive. Good wides are. So you can always figure that part out in one way or another. What you cannot figure out, though, on a full frame system is basically how you deal with your zoom lens capability. Like if the zoom lens isn't there, nothing's happening. You can always sit up here and do a panoramic shot where you got to stitch some shots together in terms of getting a wide angle or something like that. If you need to have like an ultra wide or something of that effect, you can always do those kind of things. And you can always use, editing programs to give that, lens, curvature or lens distortion, if that's what you're going after as well. So wide is way more easier to manage than trying to shoot at a focal length of distance that doesn't allow you to reach your subject, and then you're trying to go through and basically crop and try to take care of things from that. And those are the kind of things that you got to watch out for. Okay, is that whole zoom thing. And Pentax, to their credit, they came out with a 450 millimeter zoom, and I was like, you know what, this is the real deal here. You know what, this is what it's all about. Now they just got to make sure they have tele lens converters and stuff like that. And sorry, this morning I'm just didn't seem like I'm having it here. They just need to make sure that they're okay with that stuff. From that end, or come out with longer zoom lenses. But yeah, when you're talking about that holy trinity, they do have it. They have the ultra wide, short zoom, and I want to say they have a zoom lens, f2.8 for them. They're good. But like I said, for me, it's all about the, super zoom. It's all about, can you get to a 400 millimeter? Can you get to a, in this case, they have a 450, but can you get to a, 5, 6, 800 millimeter range? Because in the end, for a lot of things that you want to do, that's what you got to look at. If you're trying to do birds, if you're trying to do wildlife and stuff like that, you can't compromise with that kind of stuff. Now, okay, with that being said, image quality, a no-brainer on this. If you've seen the, Pentax system, you already know, in comparison to Sony, for example, Pentax's system is at least 2 to 4 times better than what Sony's got going on. So 36 megapixel to 36 megapixel, Pentax realistically shouldn't have a problem whatsoever. All right. And I'm being generous when I'm saying 2 to 4 times better. We could go with much higher numbers, but I think it'd make your guys' heads spin. Also, Sony has updated their imaging processor over the course of time. So just giving it the benefit of the doubt, I'll just keep it at a 2 to 4 times multiplier in terms of actual image quality. Where this is going to show the most, though, is in terms of dynamic range. Okay, this is where it's really going to show up. So remember that your dynamic exposure in today's market is one of the most important things, where with your dynamic exposure, you're sacrificing ISO performance to fulfill dynamic exposure. That's what you're doing. And a lot of cameras, what they do is, where they bottom out with their dynamic exposure, they say, oh, well, you can boost your ISO range over to this right here. So remember, if you're using, like Nikon, for example, uses a dynamic exposure of roughly, we'll say, a multiple of, we'll say 4. In other words, 200 ISO dynamic exposure is 800, or if it's a 1600, your dynamic exposure is a 64,000, or whatever it is, okay? So Nikon uses generally a multiplier of 4. So when you get to wondering, how is it that Nikon has ISOs of like 25,000 or whatever on their cameras, these higher ISOs, and you're thinking, oh man, this is totally amazing. How do they achieve those? Those ISOs are not based on surface dynamic range. They're based on the bottoming out of your dynamic exposure. That's what it is. It's basically that headroom that's being flexed, where Nikon says, you know what? Let's just throw that in as part of the camera's ISO range featuring, and no one's ever going to use it, but damn, it will look good on paper. This is generally where Pentax is going to be a little different. And this is one of the reasons to why I think Pentax they have an ISO range of 200,000 on this thing, or 200 to 200,000 on this thing, which it goes higher than 200, just to let you know, but I'm just going 200 to 200,000, is because I'm assuming they're doing the same thing, but their dynamic range should be vastly superior. I'm talking vastly superior to Canon or Nikon's in terms of relative full frame competitiveness. And generally they are. So you shouldn't be surprised there. But let's get to the core crutch of what we have to be concerned about with this camera. Okay, because we can sit up here and talk about, dynamic exposure, dynamic noise. Of course, they excel there. We can talk about autofocusing system. Yeah, they're going to excel there. We can sit up here and talk about, imaging processing and all that stuff. They excel there. Body style. Again, menu system. They'll excel in all those categories. Nobody's arguing that. And lenses, coming out of the gate, they've got some good lens selection. So you don't have to worry about that. But where you do have to be concerned about pentax, and I will be the first one to say it, is video. Video, and video again. Now, some people are going to stop right here and say, okay, I don't need to listen to this anymore because he's talking about video and I take pictures. And what I'm going to say is, keep on listening because you're going to learn something. And if you don't learn it, well, then you're going to find out that you're going to find a lot of frustration in your camera selection in the future if you don't understand the concept of how video is now impacting digital cameras. So, pentax, it's no great surprise. They really don't care. They just don't care about video. They don't. This is not something that's new. Like I said, this is not some great surprise. And the K1 is lacking when it comes to video. Now, I'm not saying that you need to hinge your purchase on video. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is you have to understand how video impacts the market when it comes to these cameras and how it can impact, I want to say, pentax as well when it comes to what you're dealing with in terms of camera. One of the reasons why video is so important at this given point in time is because video, meaning ultra high definition, or 8K or 16K or 6K, whatever you want to, hit the number at, is going to be, come here in the near future, the primary reason to why imaging processors are going to become faster. They're going to become more robust. It's going to be the reason. Cameras are now at a point where a camera imaging processor in relations to megapixel and file size is all in synchronization. It's all in synchronization. In other words, what I'm telling you is, realistically, in the way that cameras have been made traditionally, they are essentially at their zenith when it comes to a consumer grade level. If you're talking about imaging processing versus file size versus, system intake, they're already there. There is no reason to develop a brand new imaging sensor whatsoever when it comes to a camera if you're basing it on that kind of methodology. There's just not. Now some people will probably say that camera imaging processing can always get better from a JPEG end and yada, 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 so on and so forth. And I would say, yeah, that's true. It can always get better. But the fact is, it doesn't need to get significantly better. It doesn't. Fuji has already proved this with their X-Trans system. Okay? Yet again. All right, so you have to understand where I'm coming from with this, which is, I'm not saying video is necessarily just for video, but video is now going to be the primary technological driver to how cameras are developed from a future basis in terms of speed and performance. It will be. We have to start off with understanding the concept of what 4K is, okay? And basically what 4K is this. 4K is the next step above high definition. In fact, standard HD, which what it is referred to now as, basically has a resolution equivalent to 2 megapixels. 4K has a resolution equivalent to about 8 megapixels. So you can already see that there's just an enormous difference there between 2K and 4K. Now, remember, when we're talking about 4K, what are we talking about here? We're talking about pushing out an 8 megapixel, resolution at 24, 30 frames, 60 frames, 120 frames a second. Pick whatever rate you want. But then what you have to look at is, after that, you got to look at your file size. How big is that file size going to be? You start to see the importance here, don't you? Because it was different, back with standard high definition, when you were saying, oh, it's a 2 megapixel image, you're going to pump it out at 30 frames a second, okay, whatever. Even if you do non-compressed, it doesn't really matter with the way imaging sensors are built today. It really doesn't matter. It could easily be done. However, with, with 4K, you're now quadrupling that resolution. You're quadrupling that file size. But more importantly, at 8 megapixels, you have a usable still frame if you wanted to technically use it for photography. You can't really do anything with 2 megapixels. I'd definitely be the first one to say no. But 8 megapixels, let's face it, it wasn't that long ago in time when 8 megapixels was the norm. In fact, if you're talking about point-and-shoot cameras were at their zenith in time when they were between a 7 to 8 megapixel range. I'm talking about your baseline point-and-shoot cameras were. So when you start talking about, 4K and essentially how impactful it is, you got to first off look at cameras, and you've got to look at resolution, and you have to go back in time and you have to say, okay, when in time were point-and-shoot cameras mostly impacted by resolution? Like, in other words, when did cameras have their best image quality, and at the same time they were affordable and they were still recognized as a good product, meaning point-and-shoot cameras? I would say the zenith was about 8 megapixels. After that, it just went downhill. Now, some people would make the argument that for some camera manufacturers, because it depends on the manufactural basis. Like Olympus, I would definitely say it's 8. Fuji, depending on how you want to look at it, I'm actually going to say it was 6, with something like their F30. Unless you're talking about their SF, or I'm sorry, their not SF, but S100, which was 11 megapixel. You had that, but otherwise it was for Fuji it was 6. For Canon, they were able to 7, like their S70, pretty damn strong at 7 megapixel. They were definitely able to take it all the way to the Canon G15, which was effectively 14 megapixels. But after that, it was kind of over, it was done, and that was with the Digix 4 processor. Okay. Sony, with their imaging processor, they were able to do 10 to 12. They were. When other manufacturers were literally, just buckling underneath, the megapixel, restraints. Sony wasn't. They were still pushing it out there. They got to about, we'll say 10 to 12, and then they kind of just went downhill. But that was with their CCD sensor. That was not with, I want to say, their X-Trans sensor. Actually, with Sony, their best X-Trans sensor resolution has been 9 megapixels. Okay, with their XMAR. Sorry, what did I say X-Trans sensor for? I'm sorry. I meant to say XMAR or XMAR-R, but their XMAR sensor, which was their first sensor, that came out of their HX, I think it was called, yeah, HX100, or HX1, not even 100, but 1. HX1, yes, that was 9 megapixels. Okay. In Canon, it was, if you're talking a Canon standard camera, I would say 6 megapixels was their best resolution. If you were talking about their more, specialty type of camera that used a bigger sensor, then I would say anywhere from 7 to 14 megapixels was what they were able to squeeze. Once when you get into like the Digix 4 processor, so on and so forth. So, needless to say, you're talking about camera resolution. Okay, that really does work for the consumer. All right, you're talking about, at this point in time, you could take a 4K, an ultra high definition frame, and you could actually apply that frame to a digital camera, and you could get great image quality out of it. You could, and keep in mind, Canon Rebels started off at 6 megapixels, and well, now obviously they're all the way up to 24 megapixels. But my point still stands, which is we have hit camera resolution abilities now. And you have to take that with a certain level of understanding here. Like you really do. You have to understand that video is at some point going to overtake photography in just sheer power and output. It will, just based on the sciences, of the fact that videographers are going to want to crop their videos. They're going to want to have a better, color grade with their videos. They're going to want to have video. Just imagine, one day they're going to want to have videos that purely are a non-compressed TIFF format, essentially, for every single frame. It's going to be stupid like that. As silly as it sounds, it really will be stupid like that from an editing process. It will happen one day, just not anytime in the foreseeable future. And I'm not saying every single frame is going to be like 50 megabytes or something like that, but you never know. It could be, just depending on how they make movies. But my point to what I'm telling you is this: is the name of the game is data. It's all about data. And the fact is that at this point in time, 4K, if you're talking about it being non-compressed, can be pretty strenuous on an imaging processor. Non-compressed video per second, you're talking about, I've seen it run, 200 megabytes a second. All right, we'll just throw it at that number, 200 megabytes a second. So in other words, it definitely can rival camera data, even with your higher megapixel cameras. The fact is, videography in terms of per second data rates equal or can exceed even your biggest digital cameras in terms of a consumer market. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about some like phase 100 megapixel, camera. I'm not talking about something like that, okay, if we're talking from that end. But the fact is, videography and photography are at the same level now. They are, in terms of data output. And that has to be recognized. And if you don't recognize that, you got your head in the sand. Now, the reason why this is important is because in today's market, you are not going to excel. You are not going to be able to push forward with developing imaging processors based on camera data. It will not happen. And the proof is in the pudding of JPEG. So remember what I just told you about, digital cameras and how they're, and we were talking point and shoot cameras here actually, except for the Rebel, but digital cameras and their resolutions. We were talking about the 8, the 10, the 12, so on and so forth. Those were all JPEG images I was talking about in terms of output. I wasn't talking about RAW or anything like that. I was talking standard JPEG. At one point in time, I know you guys may find it hard to believe, but at one point in time, JPEG was a file system that was actually a credible file system. And then what happened was very simple. Camera manufacturers decided that, and this happened on a two front, but camera manufacturers decided that they would increase megapixel size output to God knows what end, increase ISO ranges to God knows what end, and they wouldn't fine-tune their cameras for it, And then, of course, the consumer, the DSLR consumer, became a total snob, and for whatever reason decided that RAW was the only way to shoot. And this is true. This is true. This is what happened. It was on a two front. Camera manufacturers just decided, hey, you know what? Shoot, digital cameras, that's not that big of a deal. In terms of megapixels, we can crunch this thing as high as we can go. And ISO ranges, they don't matter. Forget about, dynamic, surface exposures and whatnot. What we'll do is we'll just crank up the ISOs and say that they're usable. And if people want to be able to get a good image, that thing called Adobe Lightroom or DxO or whatever, RAW program you have to use, that's the way you'll get it. So basically, from the manufacturer's standpoint, it was just a laziness and craftsmanship of the camera. That's what it was. Where with the consumer just said, well, the only way to get a real nice picture out of a camera is you got to shoot in RAW. RAW is the only way to go. Like you hear people talk about RAW, and they'll sit up here and tell you that RAW is the only way to shoot. They'll tell you it up and down. Of course, seeing the fact that most of us have all been alive for the entire, inception of digital cameras, we know in earlier days that is not true. That you could shoot in JPEG. That you can shoot in JPEG if the camera's made correctly. And you're just fine. And this brings us to, essentially 4K. Which is, 4K, for all intents and purposes, produces a phenomenal image. But 4K is highly compressed normally. It is. It has high compression rates, but it still looks really, really good. So, having RAW in headroom is nice, but the reality is that if you make the camera right, you can shoot in JPEG and it will look perfectly fine. It can be perfectly acceptable. B, more importantly, the formats that they're using right now for 4K video, which is absolutely amazing, the compression rates are higher than what are in RAW. So you can't really make that kind of argument when it comes to JPEG. It's just manufacturers are lacklustered when it comes to JPEG. They don't want to deal with it. And they say, okay, let's just concentrate on RAW and spit this baby on out so people will buy it. And that's it. Now, how this impacts pentax is very simple. Pentax has made it no known secret, in other words, Pentax just doesn't, they've never really cared when it comes to video. Now, what's interesting about it is that back with the K20D, Pentax played around with the idea of using JPEGs as actual video frames. They had decided that they would do this. And they were able to hit frame rates of about 21 frames a second. And then after that, they basically just said, nope, forget this. We don't want to do this anymore, and just called it a day. Now, this is something that heavily impacts the K01. And here's the reason why it impacts the K01. It impacts the K01 based on the fact that, from a technological perspective, if Pentax is not willing to advance their videography aspects of their camera lineups, then they're going to hit a point in which they're not going to be able to move forward. Right now, your Pentax or Ricoh imaging processor is estimated to have an output of between 160 to 200 megabytes. Okay, maybe it's higher than that. No one really knows, but that's what it's estimated at. 4K uncompressed, you can easily hit 200 megabytes. That's not a problem. So you can do that. So Pentax is already at a limitation right now, just from an imaging processor perspective. And how does that impact cameras? Well, it's simple. Okay, let's say that you want to go with the Pentax K1. And you look at the Pentax K1 like I do, and you look at frame rate, and you're like, I don't know, man. I mean, like, you're talking 4.5 frames a second, and yeah, I'm upgrading from a K20D, but I mean, obviously, I've used other cameras between now and then, and if I want to go for faster frame rate, what do I do if I want to be in a Pentax family at full frame? Well, you can't. Now, most of you would say, well, Doug, you can't because they only got one full frame out. that is in existence right now. That's why you can't do it. But what you're missing is this. The pentax full frame at 36 megapixels already does essentially a data rate at 4.5 frames a second. It's going to do a data rate of around 160 to 200 megabytes per second in a continuous shooting mode. That's what it's going to do. You see the limitation here that I just gave you. In other words, they've already hit the bottleneck on their first full frame camera. They've already done it. So the question is, how do you acquire more speed? What is the most, shall we say, what is the most common sense method of doing so? And aside from, dealing with, external sources, the only way you're going to acquire more speed from an internal perspective is if you shift the gear in the market from photography to videography. In other words, if you can build a system that is faster around capturing 4K video, all right? If it can capture 4K video, if it can give you what you're looking for there, if you can build a system around that, then you can easily increase your frame rate per second. You can do that. And this is the challenge that pentax faces. The technological shift in terms of progression may not necessarily be in camera imagery. And the reason why it may not be in that is not so much, I want to say, still cameras are dying or something like that. No, it's not that at all. What it comes down to is market share, which means pentax is already going to pick up. They're already going to pick up people for a full frame. We'll say just for a full frame endeavor. They're going to get that. Okay, so you can't replay that card again. And the next thing you have up on the list is you've got high-speed photographers, meaning action-based ones, and then you have videographers. Well, which pool is going to be bigger? And common sense would tell us, if you can create a full frame unit that can work for videography, then obviously you can build something that's going to work for high-speed photography. Do you see how this works now? Do you see where I'm coming from with this? Originally, pentax didn't care about video, and the reasoning for it was very simple. It didn't matter. Like, in the end, if you want a camcorder, you're going to buy a camcorder. If you want a camera, you're going to buy a camera. That's just how technology goes. Doesn't matter one way or another. But, and here's where the but comes in, the fact is, videos, or I want to say video recording capability on digital cameras is, if you're talking price to performance, is the best that you can go for in today's market. A standalone camcorder, unless you're going to spend a lot of money on it, compared to a digital camera, you're never going to excel past a digital camera. It's just not going to happen. And the reasoning for it is a digital camera's imaging processor and sensor normally is superior to that of a camcorder's. So this is why people want to use, this is exactly why they want to use their SLR or their point and shoot camera when it comes to recording video. Also, you don't have to buy two devices, you only have one. But with pentax, they keep shying away from, or not even shying away, just closing the door on, slamming it in the face of videography and saying, you know what, we don't care, come back later, we'll let you know when to come back. Just we'll call you. Don't call us, we'll call you. It's basically one of those things. It's like a telemarketer. They look at videography as like a telemarketer. It's kind of like the way it really is. It's just like videography on the line, they hang up right up on them. And this is now catching up with them. Now, it doesn't mean that in the lab somewhere, in a Pentaxian lab somewhere. They're not, working on videography. I'm not saying that they're not. What I'm saying is they're not displaying it in their products yet. And what I'm also saying is this is now catching up with them. It is. And the thing is, when it comes to the videography aspect of things, really where Pentax is missing it the most is the methodology in which they need to do videography. Some people will say it's because they don't have a tracking system, a tracking focus system, or focus system, I'm sorry, when it comes to videography. Like just the sheer fact that their cameras cannot, track movement or subject matter. That it has to be preset on the focus and then you have to record. Some people say that's the problem with Pentax. That's not where the problem begins. I mean, that is a problem, but it's not the problem, okay? The problem with Pentax, which is a very simple one, is they're not coming out with a marketable way of producing video on their cameras. And they have the answer. They have the answer. And they easily could have made this work for them if they would have just put a little thought into it. If someone in the lab would have put a little bit of thought into this, they could have blown the videography out of the park. And here's what I mean, okay? Sony basically has been the first one to really do this, but Pentax, essentially already has the technology in a sense, and just think back to their sensor shift, the fact that they use multiple images to reinforce an image to give it a greater, appearance through shifting a sensor. Okay. Well, let's think of what other ways you can use the sensor. Now, I just mentioned Sony because Sony is doing this with their A6300, okay, which is going to be their follow-up to their A6000. Which is basically a Sony Nex when it's all said and done, glorified Sony Nex. But it's the concept of oversampling. And this is where I was really surprised about the Pentaxian system, which is that Pentax went out of their way to get a 36 megapixel sensor, right? And they pushed this thing to the hilt. And then you get to the video and it's like standard high definition video. And you're like, yeah, not so much. No. You get to this standard high definition video and you're like, what the F is this? What kind of BS is this right here? This makes next to no sense. You're telling me these guys have a camera in 2016 that is 36 megapixels, yet it only shoots 2K video. Like literally only shoots 2K video. Like who does this kind of stuff? Well obviously Pentax does, and they're not the only one. Some people are going to say, well, Doug, what about Canon? What about Canon? Well, Canon, to be quite honestly, if you're talking about the Canon 5DS or 5DSR, if you're talking about that camera, which is probably what some people are going to mention, that came out late last year. It only has 2K video. Pentax isn't doing anything wrong. Here's what I'm going to say about Canon. A, they have a tracking system with their camera. Now, granted, I wouldn't be bragging about Canon's, videography ability because honestly, it really does suck. All right, Canons are pretty bad if you compare them to like Panasonic or Sony or Samsung. But okay, they still have a tracking system. B, if you're talking to me about the Canon, 5D S/S, the R unit, those two units. What I'm also going to say is that was one of the dumbest ideas Canon ever came out with as far as cameras go. Okay, so you can't look to stupidity to justify other stupidity. Okay, let's not do that. Okay, we don't do that here on Phototheology. All right, and anybody who would ever want to take up a debate with me on that camera, I would be more than willing to do it. Because at $3,500, that camera's definitely not worth it. That camera should have basically been a replacement for the Canon 6D. Which should have never been made either, okay? But the fact is, look at Canon's camera lineup and then come back and actually talk to me. You'll see how disheveled it is at this point in time. There's no path to victory with their current lineup of how it's made. And also what I'd have to point out to people who would make that argument about the Canon 5D, 5DS in terms of shooting at standard 2K video is this. If I checked, Canon did come out with a 1DX Mark II, which shoots 4K video at 60 frames a second. And let us not forget Nikon. Nikon came out with their D5, which shoots 4K video at 30 frames a second for 3 minutes. Which, again, Nikon, moronic move. Why even put 4K video in there if you're only going to shoot 3 minutes of video? Now, some people are saying that Nikon's imaging processor, currently right now, they're not able to make 30 minutes of 4K video work. I would say, first off, you're full of crap. They can make it work. That's why, with the same imaging processor and the Nikon D500, it has 30 minutes of 4K video output. And also, with the Xpeed 6 and the new Nikon DL series, they have 4K video coming out with their specialty cameras that are, yeah, that's right, it's 30 minutes. So, yeah, everybody who talks this nonsense about, well, the imaging processor capabilities aren't always there, so on and so forth, it has nothing to do with that. It just has to do with the fact the manufacturer doesn't want to do it. They just don't. It's just, it's a want issue. It is a want issue. Do you want to do it, or are you incapable? They're not incapable. It's purely just a want issue, and they don't want to. Now, here's where Pentax messed up with this, okay? And we're going to get into this now, okay? Because I told you, this is basically the concern that you have to have about their system. They obviously, they don't want to do 4K video. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because all Pentax had to do was basically do a crop format on their full frame sensor. That was it. And they could have done it in the most simplistic way ever. I'm not even joking around. They could have done it in the most simplistic way ever. They could have taken their 36 megapixel, cropped it to about, for the sake of the conversation, we'll say, to a 24 or a 16 megapixel, whatever they want to do, okay? Shot the thing at 30 frames, a second, or whatever frame rate they choose, and then, downscaled it to 4K and called it a day. If that's what they wanted to do. If they wanted to make it ugly and do it like that, they could have done that. That's something that they could have done. Or what they could have done is they could have came out with a specialized format. Heaven forbid we do this now. Come out with a specialized format that allows for shooting at the full 36 megapixel. And then what happens is it's downscaled and streamed, downscaled and streamed in the form of 4K. In other words, taking the 36 megapixel, downscaling it to 8 megapixel, and then calling it a day for your 4K video. But I go beyond even that, which is this. The name of the game is oversampling. That's what it is. When it all comes right down to it, Pentax should have been smart enough to have seen, look, we have a 36 megapixel here. We have an imaging processor that has the ability to output raw 4K video. We already have that. So you got those two things going for you. What we need to do is get this 36 megapixel to take the image in, downscale the resolution through this 36 megapixel frame, and then output it in the form of 4K, or heaven forbid, we even say 8K. Do you see where I'm coming from with this now? This is the problem that Pentax has. It's this right here. Like if you're wondering what is the main issue that they actually have as far as cameras go, this is the issue right here. The issue that they have is that they're not thinking through exactly how they need to go about producing 4K, which is to take your sensor, take the full resolution of your sensor, use an oversampling system where you take the full resolution of the sensor. Then what you do is you, of course, through your camera imaging processing methodology, downscale it to the proper resolution, and then boom, there you go. It's done. It's over. That means you get full frame 4K performance using the full 36 megapixels of your sensor. Now, for those of you who say it can't be done, that would be a complete lie, because that's what Sony's doing essentially with their A6000. Or, I'm sorry, not A6000, A6300, which is they're not now. I have to point out, they're not taking the full 24 megapixel sensor. They're not doing that. But what they're doing is they're essentially taking what would be equivalent to 6K plus and downscaling it to 4K. And why is Sony doing it? Sharpness and clarity reasons. That's why they're doing it. They're doing it for that reason. They're doing it for sharpness and clarity reasons. In other words, Sony has pretty much got their butts handed to them by Samsung, by Panasonic. I mean, the fact is, Panasonic makes a way better, 4K based system than what Sony does. If you are not talking if you're talking a crop sensor. If you're talking full frame, Sony, yeah, they can win it out, and they do win it out. But if you're talking crop sensor versus Panasonic, yeah, you got to go with the Panasonic. Panasonic wins it out in the end. And then let us not even forget Samsung. Samsung is arguably even better than Sony is if you're talking about full frame. So again, this is Sony's way of saying, hold on, hold the phone, wait a second, we're going to oversample. What we'll do is we'll take a greater part of our frame. Like, for example, let's say that they take, just for the sake of the conversation, instead of 40% of the frame, they take, we'll say 80% of the frame, and then they condense it down. They condense the resolution down to the 4K resolution. So basically what they're able to do is they're able to oversample, they're able to reinforce their image quality. That's what they're doing. And that's what Pentax should have done here. I mean, 36 megapixels, you couldn't ask for anything at this point in time anyways. You couldn't ask for anything more than that. Than the 36 megapixels. That's the perfect sensor to do an oversampling with 4K video. And the thing is this, is that Pentax should have thought further than this and said, we're going to do 4K at such and such frame rate, in our own specialized format. And then we'll do 8K at such and such frame rate in our own specialized format. So you have that, which is part one. The oversampling aspect, or the oversampling issue right now, is a huge issue that Pentax has right now in regards of video. They're not thinking in the way that they ought to. You can relatively keep the same kind of camera system that you have to the degree that you want to, but you got to be able to oversample. And that's all that someone's asking for at this point. You just oversample and then spit it out at a higher resolution and then call it a day. You can do that. Number one. Number two. Okay, what is the other problem that Pentax has when it comes to videography? Well, it's simple. It comes to data, and it comes to your menu-based systems. So one of the issues that Pentax essentially has is they've got to basically work out the data issue. Like, they really have to work on data. And what I mean by that is this, is that Pentax came out with their medium format 60, or I'm sorry, not 60, but 645, Z. They came out with that. And they were like, you know what? You can shoot video, in medium format now. And yeah, it looked attractive, but once when people started shooting video with it, they were like, yeah, the way it looks on the screen here versus the way it looks on the computer are two totally different things. Now you'd sit up here and wonder, why is this the case? And the reason for it partly is just data intake, meaning that you're getting one thing on the screen thinking, oh, the video's like this. And then once when you go to put it on a computer, you find out that the data that's being recorded with, yeah, it may work on a 3-inch screen. It's not working on a 23-inch monitor, and heaven forbid, it's not going to work on some 60-inch television. This is another problem that they have, is they have to understand with how to deal with data rates and with menu systems. So when it comes to the videography aspects and things like that, one of the things that pentax really has to do is that they have to do a hard integration of their photography system into a videography system. They have to. You got to be able to, within the videography system, control your hues, your saturations, all those things. Your sharpness levels, your low key, your high key, so on and so forth. Your tones and what have you not. You got to be able to do those things, just in the same way that you would with your photography system. In fact, if they took the same photography system and overlaid it into their videography system as a video system within the camera, they wouldn't have half these damn problems. They just wouldn't have them. But the 645Z it was mind-blowing to see how pentax completely missed the mark on that. Because you would sit up here and think, hey, you're going to build a medium format camera. What, do you just want to sell it for medium format? No. Not if you're talking about just in the sense of photography. You should be selling it as medium format in the sense of videography as well. Here with the K1, it's the same story though. It comes down to, okay, again, you have 36 megapixels. You have the potential of oversampling. You decide not to do it. Then you start talking about the video system, okay? So then we start talking about credible, a credible menu system to work through with video, and the ability with your video to be able to nail down the video just right in the way that you see it. You can do it from a photography end. Why can't you do it from a videography end? And this is one of the bigger problems that pentax actually has as a manufacturer. This is one of the huge problems that they have as a manufacturer. So this is something that they need to work on, is their menu system end. And the truth is, they would have great videography ability minus an autofocusing system if they would treat their videography on their cameras in terms of their menu systems. If they would treat the videography aspect just like they do their still photography end, they'd be just fine. So you have that. And then the last thing that you're basically looking at with pentax is data rate. It's literally just data rate. It's the understanding that pentax should be intelligent enough as a company to look at it and say, okay, look, if we were to do a downsampling system, and let's say that you can downsample through an imaging processing system of 4K on an SD card, but if you use an external recording device with it, we can allow you to boost your resolutions as high as a compressed 8K or an uncompressed 4K. Again, there you go. It's the name of the game is data rate. Whether pentax encompasses it all in one system or not, or whether they have to use something that's external, totally understandable. I totally get it. I'm not against it one way or another. It's like just whatever it takes to make it work. But you would think that they would use their 36 megapixel to oversample. You would think that they would use a credible menu system just like they do with their photography for videography. Now those two things combined equal out to data rate. Okay, so we're talking now about data rate, which is the core crutch of what the ultimate issue is here. And if you cannot record it internally in your system, then what you do is you record it externally. That's all you got to do. Record it externally. Make a device that you can pair with the K1, or, heaven forbid, the 645 medium format unit, for your full frame or your medium format unit, and record this shit externally. That's all you got to do. It's as simple as that. And you would fix your videography issue right there. I mean, imagine if you, and this is just to give you, reference to what I'm talking about here. So let's say that you create a system where basically it acts as a battery grip. It's a battery grip that in turn also gives you a monitor, like a 7-inch, monitor or whatever. And it plugs into the HDMI and does a straight, HDMI to HDMI connection, meaning HDMI of the camera into the HDMI of the recording device. And then what you're able to do is stream directly onto the recording device. Now, and keep in mind, Pentax keeps this all in-house, okay? So Pentax is able to gain, revenue shares from an accessory perspective, okay? Just to be fair about this, okay? I'm not telling them to go out and to develop something they're not going to make money on and somebody else is going to make money on. No, they can keep it in-house, But if they relieved the stress off of the camera, in other words, all the camera does essentially is it processes in the end, what the camera does essentially is it simply just, it's gonna, process the downscaling, but not the recording aspect of it. That part's gonna be done by the external device. That would work, I think, just fine for where Pentax lies as well. I think it would. And the reason why I could see something like that working for them is again, they could go for a RAW based 4K if they wanted to. Or they could go with a compressed 8K if they wanted to, and they would be just fine. Obviously, there would be advantages to a raw 4K. There would. But there would clearly be advantages to a compressed 8K as well. Again, it's oversampling that we're talking about. And again, when it comes to data rate, if the camera itself needs to have a boost in power consumption in order to make it work, that's what you have the battery grip there for. It's as simple as that. I mean, and this is where Pentax is missing the boat here. When you start chalking this up now into terms of photography, okay, when we start talking about this from a standpoint of photography, what we have to realize is this: Pentax, from where they stand, they have to truly think about what accessorization is going to be for a full frame system or for a medium format system. Number one, they got to understand what is true accessorization for a camera like what these are. Number one. Number two, what Pentax has to understand is if I accessorize my camera, what kind of real output am I getting from it? So is the reason to why Pentax can't, do 4K video, just do purely to a power consumption perspective? Well, if that's the case, then put some damn battery grips on that thing and call it a day. Make something that's specialized for it. Is the reason to why Pentax doesn't want to do it, having a proper menu system for it and so on and so forth, is again due to the amount of power that it would draw out of it. Is the reason why they don't use an autofocusing system, auto track and focusing system, because of power consumption related issues. Is this another reason as well? Again, if these are the kind of issues that you have, then build external pieces that will fix them for you. It's as simple as that. And to my point of how realistic, I am in my thinking here on this. Again, Sony's already doing oversampling. Again, you can get yourself an Assassin to record non-compressed or whatever, 4K through certain given manufacturers, so you can get better videography. And to their point of remote control and stuff like that, you can do it on devices like Assassins, but B, you can even do it on your cell phones. I mean, like, that's how realistic I am about this. If Pentax even wanted to place it where Pentax says, okay, we've come up with a recording system that actually oversamples and it, it produces great video, and the consumer uses their cell phone as the recording device. In other words, it records directly onto your cell phone. You just need to have a Samsung, like Galaxy Note 5 or Galaxy, S or S Edge or I'm sorry, 6. Galaxy S6 Edge or 6. Then you can actually have the data streamed on there. Then fine. Problem solved. Again, another way to make this work. But these are the kind of things that Pentax has to think about if they want to grow the base. Because what you're talking about there is you're talking about a greater level of intimacy with your full frame or medium format system. Now, I don't see why you can't do this with crop sensor either, actually. I think they could do the same thing. The same methodology I just mentioned could be used or applied to crop sensor capability. But what this would really do is from a speed perspective, what this would do is this would change Pentax's scope of how do we create a greater and better performing imaging processor. If Pentax were to go down this road that I'm talking about, what it would do for them is it would A, give them a much greater market share than what they currently have right now, number one. B, what it would do is it would align them with brands like Samsung, where Samsung has a lot of the kind of abilities I'm actually talking about right now, okay? Especially with the cell phone and that kind of stuff. C, what it would do, though, is it would give them the R&D we'll say purposing. It would give them the purposing from an R&D perspective to further progress the imaging processor, to further progress the autofocusing system in different ways. In other words, they would really be looking at multiple avenues and being justified in looking at those multiple avenues. One of the things that people tend to forget about Pentax is that they're a highly conservative brand. They don't do something unless they believe there is a reasoning for doing it. They just don't do it. And that makes perfect sense. They're not like Canon. They don't say, hey, let's just go build a 50 megapixel camera because, we can't really build a medium format camera because that means we'd have to open up a brand new market and we've been taking profit losses and what have you not. So that's really not going to work out for us. And even though a 50 megapixel camera that would have the overall dynamic range output of a Rebel, no less, should probably be the replacement for that 6D thing that's really hasn't worked out for us the way we were expecting it to. How about we let's make it as expensive or make it more expensive, in fact, than a 5D Mark III. All I can do is shake my head to that thing. Like, I could have seen if they would have made it like $2,500, but to make it $35, it's like, no. But, they don't go out and just build stuff to build stuff like Canon does as a brand, or like Nikon, for example. Nikon does the same thing. Or Sony. And Sony's probably, honestly, the worst of every company. They just go out and build stuff to build stuff, and then it's like, it failed. Well, let's go try and build something else that's just like it with a couple of tweaks to it. And I'm talking from a product performance perspective, it fails, not so much from sales and stuff like that. Because the fact is, Sony cameras are highly profitable for Sony because of their mirrorless system that they use. But that profitability is also why their products keep not making traction in the market. It's like if you took probably, 2/3 of the profit versus 100% of the profit and took that extra third that you're going to lose in profit and apply it towards a better system, you'd probably get way better results in market share and in terms of customer satisfaction to go back and reinvest in you. But Sony will probably never learn. So, and their other argument would probably be, look, we don't need to be successful in the way that we do stuff because we provide the supplies for everybody else. So they're still making money. But with Pentax, like I said, they're a highly conservative brand. And where they're missing the mark is this, is that the exploration of trying new things, of going out and making the statement, the mission statement, and what have you not, going through and doing all those things in the way they need to do it, stepping beyond their conservative ways is what they need to do at this point in time. And I'm going to be honest with you, I do not have a problem with them being a conservative company. I don't. Because they're a common sense based conservative company. They are. They do things that make a lot of sense. And I honestly don't think anyone has probably sat down in that company and said, what are the real advantages of us diving into the 4K system, and what advantages can we get out of it? So we already talked about oversampling. We already talked about, more exact video accuracy. We already talked about, superior data rates. We already talked about how you can accessorize it. We already talked about how you can even drive it down to the baseline consumer with, I want to say, phone remote control and stuff like that, and using your phone as the actual recording device versus just recording it on a camera. We've already talked about all these things. So this is really no big surprise. And keep in mind with the phone, just imagine what you could do if you use that as your smart remote. Using your phone as your smart remote, you'd be able to not only record your shit on your phone, but then on top of that, you're able to upload it to whatever you want to and be done with it right then and there. So if Pentax could understand these kind of things, they would be better off. And not everything's about horsepower in this case. Now, from an R&D perspective, yes, this would light the fire underneath the bottom of these guys to sit up here and make a more powerful imaging processor. It would. Of course. Look at Samsung. Samsung saw the potential in 4K, and you saw what they did with that NX1 system. They came out with something that was highly robust. They came out with something that they knew was going to work. And they didn't play any games about it. They said, look, this is how this is going to play out. We're going to make this really work. And look at Sony. Sony got their heads handed to them by Panasonic and Samsung both, and said, oh, no. Here's what we're going to do. You guys are dealing in 4K. That's looking pretty good for you. We're going to do a 6.5K or 6 point whatever K, and we're going to downscale it to 4K so we even have better looking video. So what are the real benefits of doing this though? Okay, because you guys might be wondering, okay, well, Doug, what are the real benefits of doing this? Here's the ultimate benefit. It's imaging processing and speed that you gain from it. Okay, so as you advance through 4K, what happens is you advance your imaging processor. Now remember, let's go back to what I had said earlier about pentax. The pentax shoots at a frame rate of 4.5 frames per second. Now, some people would say that's fast enough. I'm going to say, no, it's not. Pentax easily should have had a 7 frames a second, and then cropped, they should have been doing 10 frames a second. That's exactly what this should have been. This is not an argument here that even needs to be had. They should have been 7 frames because that's where the market is on, some of the Nikons, and it's about the speed of some of the Sonys and stuff like that. But instead, because of their imaging processor and how they're not able to output, the data rate that they need to, they're stuck at 4.5. Now, had they been working on 4K in a relative format, or had they gone down the road of beginning to treat 4K in the way that I'm talking, again, this would give them a bigger pool of consumers. And from there, for their next model, they would be able to make the proper investments into the imaging processor to gain what they need to gain out of it so that they can have a data rate of, 300 megabytes a second, 400 megabytes per second, 500, I don't know, just depends. But the justification would be there. The problem right now is they don't have a justification to go to a 3 or 4 or 5 or 600 megabyte per second system. And the reason why they don't, obviously, is because, they don't have the market share there to do it. They just don't. Now, here's the other thing I do want to point out, and I think it's very important that we point this out here, is that this camera, had they done it the way they needed to do it in terms of beginning the oversampling process, accessorizing it, and all the above that I mentioned, would lead into the next camera, which could be a high-speed full-frame camera. And Pentax would be able to ask, buku bucks for it. Obviously, I'm not saying people want to spend buku bucks on high-speed cameras, but I'm saying Pentax could easily ask for example, 2,800 versus 1,800, or they could ask for 3,800 versus 1,800. They'd be able to do those kind of things. Listen, 4K just matters in that sense, and again, like Samsung, the way it worked for them is their imaging processor from the NX, we'll say their NX30 to their NX1, or NX300 to their NX500. I believe when Samsung released their new imaging processor, this is all joking aside, it was like 4 times more powerful than the previous one. 4 times more powerful. Now, you might be wondering, okay, well, what's the significance to that? Well, that made all the significance in the world. Do you think Samsung just magically was able to produce a 28 megapixel resolution that could shoot at 15 frames a second just for the heck of it? No. The reason why they were able to jump from 9 to 15 frames a second, the reason why they were able to jump from standard 2K to 4K, in the way that they were, is because it was the imaging processor that had changed on the camera. That's what happened. Samsung was able to do a ton of things. They were able to, first off, process 28 megapixels in an ASP, which again, we've already had our conversation about Samsung, so just go check out that episode there with their BSI sensor, if you want to do that. Samsung, though, was able to make great strides. Panasonic, talk about another company, man, that's hitting hard on the 4K realm. Nikon, they're coming out with 20 megapixel cameras with their DL series that shoot in 4K, but also these cameras shoot 20 frames a second. Now, I'm going to say this, we always have to remember that your focusing system has to be able to match your continuous frame rates and stuff like that. And I think that's fair to say. And yeah, with the Nikon, it's not going to be like continuously focusing and doing that 20 frames a second. But my point to where I'm going with this is that there is a way to do things in the sense of doing them right versus there is a way to do things in the sense of doing them wrong. And I think in the end, if you are talking about, this idea of Pentax progressing themselves and for Pentax to overcome essentially what I see as the final hurdle of their camera lineup, it is in this. It's in the video department. Again, I'm not trying to say that videography is going to trump photography. What I'm saying is that you have to look at the benefits of what videography is all about. Remember, Canon and Nikon became incredibly overbloated in terms of their market shares, camera market shares, due to, and this is due to the videography movement. That's what did it for them. They never would have had the market shares that they have now had it not been videography. Now, granted, Canon has suffered and is going to continue to suffer because of this, because they made it look like, hey, you can go out and shoot an Avengers movie, all you got to do is just grab yourself a Canon Rebel, and then there you go. That was basically the insinuation that people took away from it, from them. And then people got their cameras and realized, man, these things are junk. And the truth is, if you wanted to spend Rebel dollars and get, commercial grade performance, that was called Panasonic, and that was called Sony at the time. And to a lesser extent, maybe we might even say Samsung, depending on what time frame we're talking about. But now, things are beginning to reshift themselves in the market, and Pentax has to be prepared for that reshifting. You can't just say, oh, because we came out with a full frame that's 36 megapixels, that alone is going to, progress us in terms of our market share. No, you got to look at the whole package. And the package here is 70% good and 30% evil, you know. And, you know, to that point with Pentax, what I would also say is that 30% that's evil, why is it the way it is? Is it because it was impossible for you to achieve the things that I've listed here today? I don't buy into that. It's definitely not impossible to achieve because other manufacturers have done it. Or is it the unwillingness to want to go about doing it because you just don't believe that it's going to do anything for you, or you don't want to have a marketing campaign around that given avenue? You know, now, and with that being said, on the marketing campaign side of things, they may be holding off to market the next camera like that. I don't know. Nobody knows that except for them. You know, but what I am going to say is that it would have made way more sense to have marketed 36 megapixels with those capabilities that I had just mentioned now. And then what you would have had is you would have had a triad, essentially, in the sense of, hey, marketing aspect one, Pentax has finally come out with their first full frame, you know, consumer camera. Marketing aspect number two, Pentax has come out with a value-based camera that's 36 megapixels that does da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. Marketing aspect number three, Pentax video system has been vastly upgraded where it uses an oversampling of the 36 megapixels to achieve 4K, you know, through an external accessory device. It's able to do 8K, yada, 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 so on and so forth. You see where this is working now. You see the benefit that this has for the camera. Even if you don't care about videography, what you understand and what we're talking about here today for our conversation is it only benefits Pentax. And this is the thing. Sometimes you got to be smarter than yourself. And what I mean by that is that you got to look beyond yourself and say, you know what? If I want this camera that I want to invest in to become truly successful, I need these guys to add these features in that are going to get these other people to buy into what I'm getting. They may not be getting it for the same reasons that I'm getting it, but growth is growth. You know, growth is growth. You know, it's kind of like when people, and I'll just leave this as my last thing here, and then we'll basically cut it on out. But it's kind of like when people talk to me about, you know, Nikon and Canon, you know, and then they start talking about wanting to do, you know, wildlife photography. And then they start talking about, you know, the magical 400 millimeter lens. And then I mention that, that, you know, hey, you know, for, you know, if you're not looking to blow $2,000 on a lens, essentially, then, or it's going to feel like 2,000 when it's all said and done. If you're not looking to blow $2,000 on a lens, essentially, then you need to go with, you know, Panasonic, or you need to go with Samsung, and you can get that 400 millimeter lens output, you know, and at the cost of a Nikon or Canon, you know, mid-grade 300 millimeter lens. And, you know, they'll make up some BS excuse about Nikon and Canon and all this other stuff. And I'll be like, no, actually the Olympus and Panasonic are faster for what you're going after. They've got a better focusing system, and I'll go through a whole bunch of things, you know, if they're wanting to talk to me about it. But then I'll point out something in terms of focal zoom length, okay, which is this. Your Nikon and Canon use a crop factor of roughly about 1.5, okay, 1.6. So what it does is it takes a 300 millimeter lens and it turns it into a 400 millimeter lens. That's what it does. Your Panasonic or Olympus uses a crop factor of 2. So it takes their 75 to 300 millimeter lens and it turns it into a 150 to 600 millimeter lens. Now, millimeters in terms of focal lengths and what they do are meaningless to people as a general rule of thumb because they cannot comprehend what true distance is, except if you do it like this. You know that the crop factor is going to give the 300 millimeter lens on the Nikon or Canon a 450 millimeter length of zoom. So let's say that person has a height of 4 feet and 6 inches. Okay, let's say it's a person of 4 feet and 6 inches. Where the Olympus and Panasonic, because they use a crop factor, they turn that 300 millimeter into a 600 millimeter. So let's say that person, let's say it's a person, and their height is, because it's 600 millimeters, 6 feet. In other words, every 100 millimeters you have, you're talking about a foot on a person. So which one is taller? The person who is, 4 feet and a half, or the person who's 6 foot? When you relate it like that, people go, oh, you know what? Okay, yeah, maybe that that Olympus or Panasonic's not so bad. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's the way you got to think of it. That's, and then the last thing is this: do you want to spend, $2,000 on a lens, or do you want to spend $450 on a lens? I'm sorry, not $450, but $550 on a lens. Which one do you want to do? Now, granted, I mean, there are some advantages with going with a $2,000 Canon lens over a, $550 Olympus, lens. That's 400 versus, the 300 millimeter there in terms of their respective ranges. But from a cost perspective and the bodies that they're going on, if you start summing all that up, it turns out to be a very, very different story. Like, in other words, you can't take a damn Rebel and then go put a 400 millimeter lens on it and expect to actually overtake an Olympus or a Panasonic that can be premium grade in their categories, and put the lens, the 70 to or the 75 to 300 millimeter lens on there. You're not going to stand a chance with a Canon Rebel. No, you're not. Not if you're trying to do it from a cost factor perspective. It's never going to happen. So, and not to mention, for that kind of money, I could turn around and buy the Nikon, turn around and buy a good Panasonic or Olympus, the zoom lens, and then get a 2.8, short zoom and long zoom for all the money you're going to dump into that, body only Canon, whatever, and then that 400 millimeter lens. So my point to and this isn't even pentax we're talking here. My point to what I'm talking about is you got to be smart in how you wrap your package. You got to be smart in how you wrap it, because that's what's going to appeal to people in terms of, obtaining market share. So that's just to give you guys a little, food for thought there, if you're wondering about how I look at this kind of stuff. But anyways, you guys take care, and I will see you next time. All right. Bye-bye.